seconds before we fully live on every single channel. So let's hold on for a minute or just a few seconds. And then we are probably good. Awesome. Let me switch on the screen and make sure that we can have me and Graham, both of us on the screen. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So welcome to the Master Your Exit Live show powered by The Big Exit. I'm Lynn, and together with Graham, will be your host for today. On this Master Your Exit show, we bring you practical insights, expert interviews, interviews with exiteers, and tools to help small business owners like you prepare for your big exit. This live show airs every Tuesday at 7 a.m. in Los Angeles, 10 a.m. in New York, or 3 p.m. in London. And we keep each show short and simple, about 30 minutes maximum. If you're tuning in live on our YouTube channel or on our LinkedIn channel, welcome. If you've joined us live here in the virtual Zoom studio, awesome. You can drop all your exit related questions via the chat function, and then we'll answer them during this show. Or if we don't have the time, we'll answer them during next show. If you're catching this episode later as a replay, just so you know, all of the episodes can be found on our website, thebigexit.co/master your exit shows, or as an audio version on your favorite podcast platform. That was the introduction. And on today's show, we will give you a guideline on how to find buyers for your business. Now, we've been running a show before where we talked about different buyers that you can have for a business. So it might make sense to just spend a couple of minutes on different kinds of buyers, but then we'll dive into a very practical guide on how did exited founders or exited business owners, how did they find a buyer for their business? So we'll share from clients' experiences, from our own experiences. There's so many ways you can find a buyer for your business. So what have we seen in the market to basically kind of give you a guideline or a couple of ideas on how you could potentially find a buyer for your business. But Graham, let's talk a little bit first. We did a whole episode on this before, and I'm happy to put it in the show notes on different kinds of buyers. So maybe let's talk a little bit about strategic buyers and financial buyers before we talk into the practicality of how do you find a buyer for your business.
I think that's a great place to start, and I think we often hear this sense of most buyers or most sellers want to sell to a strategic buyer. We hear this word thrown around quite glibly, but
It's a strategic buyer.
what does it actually mean? Okay, so normally in the mind of a seller is they want to get a value that's much higher than the intrinsic value of what their business is. So a strategic buyer is typically somebody who's acquiring your business not just for the cash flow and the profits, but because they see an opportunity to further monetize something that you bring to the table. So a strategic reason, it could be that you're a big competitor to theirs, and by acquiring you and then becoming the dominant player in the market, obviously subject to we're talking small businesses here, so usually it doesn't, competition authorities, and that isn't really a big deal. But if there's two small shops in your village, or whatever, and you can take the competition out, that obviously creates a strategic advantage. So a strategic buyer is somebody who normally pays a significant premium because when they add the two businesses together, two is better than one. Okay, it could be because of improved supply chain, access to more customers, or even access to monetize your base or your clients in a different way. So that's a strategic buyer. Normally they'd be quite involved operationally, or bringing the two businesses together. Financial buyer is someone who looks at it through the cold, hard lens of just like financial return. Okay, so think about it this way. If you took your 100 euros or 1,000 euros and you put in a savings account or bank account, you would get interest on that, and you would earn interest, and it would grow very slowly, given what interest rates on deposits and savings accounts are now. But essentially, that's kind of risk free, or you can buy government bonds and whatever. So there's a low rate interest. A financial buyer wants to buy the shares in your business and they want to treat it like an investment. They don't really want to be operating or running the business. They're looking at it purely from a financial lens. Okay, there are different types of financial buyers and they all have slightly different agendas, but fundamentally, they want to generate a financial return from the asset being your business. Okay. So they're not going to pay a premium. They're focused on your business generating a set amount of returns relative to the risk that's intrinsic in your business. So um, that's kind of the difference between financial and strategic buyers. Financial buyers usually would pay less. Okay. It would be very return based and they're trying to maximize for them acquiring at the lowest possible price or the lowest fair price is the best thing because if they lower their cost of acquisition, their percentage return increases. So those are the two, I guess, fundamental differences.
Amazing. And I think this is something to just, if you are a small business owner or a founder and you're thinking about selling your business one day in the next couple of years or in the shorter term, it's really good to have this understanding that there's different kind of buyers. And for you, you need to kind of understand what's the buyer in front of you because they will look at different things and they speak a different language and they'll value the business differently. So you need to kind of do your homework a little bit in understanding who the buyer is in front of you because they'll be looking at different things. They'll be valuing the business different. So that's important to know. Um, I think when you go into the market, Graham, to sell your business, it could be that you have a mixture, right? Some buyers will be strategic buyers, other will be financial buyers. They don't exclude each other when you bring a business to market.
Yeah.
But
I think,
ideally, go ahead.
yeah, I think, in that case, I mean, our experience is that typically strategic buyers, if I look at all sales across all the markets and that we look at, I mean, not that we brokers, but I would say usually probably less than 10% of businesses are strategically acquired, okay, or by strategic buyers. So whilst most people want that as an outcome, it's more pragmatic to say like build my buyer so that's attractive to a financial buyer. If I happen to find a strategic buyer, fantastic. But like don't hang out on that. So you want to build to ensure your best chances of success and getting the best possible price. So if the foundations are solid that a financial buyer would acquire it, and then a strategic buyer comes along, or you find a strategic buyer, great. You can do even better. But I do want to just say one other thing as well is that, when we talk small businesses, the lines between strategic and financial, there's probably a few other types of buyers you can think about as well. And I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole, but sometimes it's a lifestyle business, very small businesses. Somebody might just be buying the business because they want to keep themselves busy. Okay. Think about like a surf shop at the beach in summer. It might be a kind of business that doesn't produce a huge amount of income, but it's kind of a real lifestyle business. And sometimes those businesses are people acquire for a lifestyle rather than a pure financial decision. So you can probably extend that spectrum a little bit when you start looking at really small businesses. But I guess the same principles apply.
Gotcha. And I've seen multiple instances of people who have sold their business where, there was an array of interested buyers. Both there were strategic buyers and financial buyers at the same time, which is great. It's already great if you have multiple interested buyers because then you can create a little bit of a competition between them and like a bidding war between them. But whenever there's a mixture of buyers, from all the cases that I have seen, it is almost always the strategic buyer that will close the deal because they value higher. And the financial buyers who are also trying to, buy the business, they don't have the means or the desire to overvalue the business and they tend to not buy the business. It's always the strategic one who ends up with the business because they're willing to put in that extra little bit of effort because it's such a strategic advantage to them to actually scoop up that business and integrate it in their own business. So wherever I've seen multiple sets of buyers in the due diligence or in the bidding process, if I can say it like that, it's always the strategic one that closes the deal.
Yeah, I think it also just, some industries, for example, like private equity ultimately is a financial buyer by definition. Okay. And often
Yeah.
you'll get like roll-ups, for example. So it's a big trend in the UK at the moment, small accounting practices being it happened with vets, it happened with dentists, just being acquired. And those kind of financial buyers have a very set formula. Usually they'll pay X amount of normalized profits, take it or leave it. And then what they do is they roll up lots of these 10, 20, 30, package them all together, and then they sell to a bigger group at a much higher exit multiple or exit valuation. So,
Mm.
often financial buyers are ruthless. They can be quite ruthless, in that
Yeah.
I'm not saying all of them, but, especially with the roll ups and that's the whole thing. Acquire lots, put it together, strip out the efficiencies, and then sell at a higher price. So, yeah, knowing your type of buyer is critical when, before you can say, how am I going to find a buyer?
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about just practically
Mm.
for all the cases that you have seen, the experiences that you have had, the cases that I have seen, and the experiences that I have had. Where do, in the end, where do small business owners and founders that you have seen have found their buyers? Like, I have a few great stories that I'm happy to share. I'd love to hear from you as well. Um, what have you seen recently in the market happening of like whoever bought a business from a small business owner or a founder?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start close to home and then move outwards a little bit. Okay, so everyone thinks they're going to go and put it on auction and find a buyer, but often, especially in small businesses, often the buyer is somebody that you already know. Okay, that happens quite often.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need to go out to a broker and all that. So I'll give you a few examples of where this could be the case. Um, Staff members. Okay, so we talk about a management buyout or an ESOP, a share transfer scheme to staff. A lot of small businesses, that's often the case. You've had this person who's worked for you for 10 or 20 years and they want to continue the legacy, and they take over or buy the business. That's one. Um, it could be a fellow shareholder. So, if you've got two shareholders, it could be an existing shareholder who one person grows tired and they want to move out, and then the existing shareholder buys out. Or it could be a local competitor, or one of your suppliers. So often it's somebody in your supply chain who sees you doing a cool thing and they want to roll you up, or a competitor who wants to expand into a slightly different line. So often with small business, it's somebody who's quite close, and you might just get this approach out of nowhere. You could be out for drinks and somebody says, "Hey, like I'm actually interested in buying your business," and it's one of your suppliers, your competitors, or whatever the case. I wouldn't say direct competitors, but that happens quite often. And then you start to move out, as your, and somebody who knows you and trusts you and knows your business and is in your circle. Uh, could be a client of your accountant. It could be whatever. So I tend to say, like, depending on the type of business, those don't ignore those options for sale. And then you move out to say, okay, well, now do you go to people that you don't know? And again, I'll use an analogy. Okay, when you're getting to know people or dating or finding a life spouse, whatever the case, right? In the old days, it would be from people in your circle, in your friendship group. And your friend would set you up. And that's what happened with my wife and I. We kind of got set up on that. But now it's like, okay, go on to whatever platform, put a profile out there and hope somebody just kind of matches. So those are the two extremes. Maybe you want to talk about some of the other options as you move outside of your closed circle into sort of more open market options.
Yeah, just want to get back to, your inner circle or your existing network, because you've mentioned employees. I've seen this happen quite a few times. Employees buy the business. There's already that trust there. They know your business inside out. You know your business is in good hands. You know that they'll honor the legacy that you have created. So employees happens quite a lot. And a lot of people love to sell to their employees as well for all of these reasons that I've just mentioned. Co-founders, we've just seen an exit to a co-founder, which could be tricky, but it could also be just the natural progression of, the growth of the business. So buying out a co-founder is also, if you have a co-founder, is also definitely an option. The other thing you didn't mention, but I've seen that a couple of times, is family members.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sons, daughters, cousins, nephews, uncles, whoever's part of the business. Like, for example, my grandfather sold his business to his younger brother, who was also already in the business. So that's, for example, also an option, who then sold it to a cousin. So it
Yeah.
really is a family business. So family members could be there as well. It could be part of the legacy from one generation to another. They can be a little bit slippery, these kinds of exits as well, because it is family. But definitely, yeah, when you have family members in the business, they're often the first in line to take over the business. So you can sell to a family member too. So that was the one that you didn't mention yet, and that kind of like popped into my mind. And
Yeah.
I think what you rightfully say is it's very likely that your buyer is already in your network. And if it's not an
Mm.
employee or a co-founder or a family member that's already part of your team, it's very likely to be a client who has
Mm.
been working with you, um, a supplier who has been working with you already and is looking to expand, or a competitor, which is a little bit more tricky because the whole due diligence process, you want to be a little bit more sensitive about the amount of information that you wish to share when you're having conversations with a competitor. So it's definitely a bit more of a thoughtful process, I would say. But clients, suppliers, competitors, 100%. And then I think for small business owners and small founders, we probably covered 90% of
Yeah.
whoever's going to buy a small business, right?
I want to add one more to that. And often it's somebody doing something similar to you, in today's global world, in a different jurisdiction. So somebody wanting to enter your market. So if somebody wants to get into the Belgian market and they're doing something similar in the UK or into the US, that's often a strategy. And there's also been kind of this raft of it's quite big in the US, or what they call search funds. Okay, so you know, yeah, the success, I guess, of those, the jury's out on, but they are out there. It's qualified MBA people looking to buy a business. So it's another option. But all these things are like quite close to home. They're quite, a small grouping of people. And I guess then you start to draw a line to say, Lynn, how do you move beyond that? Okay, so
Yeah.
the realms of brokers and sell side advisors and all of those sorts of things. I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to maybe move into a bit of that discussion.
Yeah. Just to wrap things up, I mean, just knowing that, I mean, I don't have the exact data on this, so I'm a little bit wary of the percentages, but I think the biggest chunk of small businesses that are being sold to somebody already in your network. And this
Mm,
is so
absolutely.
powerful because I mean, we tend to think or believe that it will be somebody from outside of our network that will buy our business, but probably it's not. It's probably already someone you're doing business with or you're connected with, whether
Mm,
that's through your business or a community that you're part of from your industry, for example. It is very,
mm,
very likely you already know the buyer of your business. So whenever you're thinking of like, who am I going to sell my business to? Think of all these people in your network and start just listing them out. Make a little Excel file of like who these
mm,
people are. If you go to network events, think about like, oh, these could be the people that could potentially sell my business, or buy my business. You could do a little bit of research on them as well. Like, have they bought a business recently? Like, what have they been
mm.
up to? Have they been doing some acquisitions? You can start doing your homework there already. So if you're thinking like, I don't really know where to look for a buyer, I don't know who would buy my business. Well, the thing is, you probably already know who will buy your
Yeah.
business. So spend a little bit of time on doing that. And then there is a smaller percentage, quite small percentage of business buyers you don't know yet that could buy your business.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about those. So how do you
Yes, I,
find them? How do you expand into their network? Like how do you set up these kinds of, how do you figure out who they are if you don't know who they are?
I'm going to use two examples in two industries, which I think a lot of your audience are. One is, let's call it online retailers. Okay, there's a lot of online retail business people looking to sell, or brands. And the other is in the agency model. So, marketing and advertising agencies. And the first thing I'd say in those industries is there's often a lot of consolidation that happens. So, let's say you're selling online jewelry or you're selling online swimwear, or whatever the case might be. Sometimes there will be retail buyers in your market that acquire those brands, and then they bring them into the fold. That happens quite a lot. You'll know in the UK it might be Marks and Spencers who's buying competing brands. Okay, so that's a logical place to start. Is who's bigger than you and in that industry and likes to acquire brands, okay, and
Yeah,
and businesses. That
that
happens in
sums
the
it up.
e-commerce
Yeah.
space. Yeah, and then in the let's call it the advertising or the marketing space, there's a lot of that as well. In the old days, it would have been the WPPs, it would have been the Ogilvies and what have you that would go and acquire sort of niche upstarts and those sorts of things. So they're often industry players who are known for being acquisitive, and they grow through acquisition. So that's a good place to start, to say who's in your industry, much bigger players who are acquisitive by nature. And often you can pick that up by doing a little bit of basic research, and nowadays pop it into ChatGPT and it'll probably come up with a list pretty quickly. Um, and then when they are acquisitive, they would usually have acquisition teams and corporate finance teams, and you can reach out to them. Okay. um, you know, that's one, and probably the most pragmatic for this audience. And then you could go to professional sellers, depending on the size of your business. You could go to a business broker who has got qualified buyers. It's like in the property space, you go to a realtor who's got qualified buyers. And as you go sort of a little bit more up market, the bigger your business, you'd probably go to a sell side advisor who could run a process to say, hey, I'm looking for these types of buyers. And usually they would then go and they'd have some people in their books, but they would do a search to find, you know, uh, it's like an exclusive matchmaking. Okay. Um, and I think that's the kind of thing, like you see it, they have these shows on TV, like, find a spouse, and the wealthy people go to these matchmakers and they find somebody who matches. It's no different in business, right? So, yeah, those are probably the three most practical ways. Big industry acquirers who are looking to acquire businesses or are acquisitive by nature, business brokers if you're a smaller business, and even there you need to do your research around credible brokers, and but they can be online or physical brokers, and then your sort of, let's call it, sell side advisory or corporate finance kind of houses. I'm not going to go into the private equity space. That does happen, but I think for this audience, probably not, probably more the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah. I love this, just very pragmatic, practical approach, because how often do we get the question? I mean, we get it all the time. Like, how do I find a buyer? Where's this buyer? Like, it's kind of like almost like this mythical thing that lives, person that lives somewhere hidden in a cave somewhere. But there's actually very practical ways in finding a buyer. Like, look at your existing network already, whether that's within your team or people you already do business with, because it's very likely that your buyer will be in there. And if you decide to expand into a buyer base you are not aware of yet, then you can, like you were saying, use a broker. If you're a bigger business, like an M&A advisor, for example, these kinds of people that can help you find a potential buyer. Or what we haven't mentioned yet, I think there's one more thing that we can add to that list, Graham, is the buyer and seller platforms. Those online platforms, call them the Tinder of the business buying matchmaking, where there are, hundreds or thousands of potential business buyers who you don't have a clue who they are, but you can put your business on there as well and like open it up to a whole bunch of potential buyers for your business too. So that would be the thing that I would want to add to, if you're looking to expand your potential buyer base with people you don't know yet, then probably a platform could be an opportunity for you too. So that's kind of, I think, a very easy and pragmatic way to look for potential buyers for your business. Is there anything else, just keeping an eye on the time as well, Graham? Anything else you want to add to this very pragmatic guide on how to find a buyer for your business?
Yeah, I'd say one thing. It probably goes into the next step is once you found a buyer, okay, or potential buyers, is actually um, always do your due diligence on the buyer. So we often talk about the buyer doing the due diligence on the seller. Okay. But that's probably an episode on itself is once you've identified potential buyers, how do you know that they're actually legit? Okay. Do they actually have proof of funds? Can they actually pay for you? Have you go and do your reference checks with other people that they've acquired? I've seen horror stories of these so-called acquisitions, and it turns out, that it's scams running. Okay, so you got to be careful. I think that's maybe a lead into one of the next episodes, Lynn. But
Definitely.
yeah, I'd say it begins with research, taking ownership. And if you're big enough, or certain types of businesses, get somebody in your corner to help you. Speak to one of your trusted advisors, speak to your accountant, speak to people who've done it before, speak to other business owners that you know. If it's in your business community, whether that's, I won't name it, but whether it's your local business network that you belong to, and that's a good place to start.
Amazing. Thank you. I think this was a jam-packed, value-packed episode on a very pragmatic ways on how to find a buyer for your business. So, if you've been watching this, that's a wrap for this week's episode of the Master Your Exit live show. Thank you so much for joining me and Graham today. I hope you're leaving with some valuable insights that help you prepare for your big exit. Now, remember, you can catch the replay of this episode and all of the other episodes on our website at thebigexit.co/master your exit shows with a little dash in between, or listen to the audio version on your form. Now, from you, send in your exit questions for next week's show by going to our website, thebigexit.co/master your exit sign up, and you can sign up there. You can send us your exit related questions and we can answer them on any of the other future episodes that we are doing. We'll be back next week, Tuesday at 7 a.m. in Los Angeles, 10 a.m. in New York, or 3 p.m. in London with more tips, expert interviews, and tools to help you master your exit. Until then, keep building, keep preparing, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for being on the show, Graham.